One of the richest and most powerful men in the world, Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates, talks extramarital affairs, blackmail, meetings with one of the world's most notorious sex offenders. Gates grilled for hours today about his ties to Jeffrey Epstein as the House Oversight Committee continues its investigation into the Epstein files. Now, Gates, who has not been publicly accused of wrongdoing by any of Epstein's survivors, he has not been criminally charged in any way. He does appear in the Justice Department's documents multiple times. And in today's closed-door testimony, Gates telling lawmakers, quote, "I never witnessed nor had any indication that Epstein was engaged in ongoing criminal conduct," went on to say, "I have never victimized anyone." Gates also said he only met with Epstein to discuss philanthropy and described those meetings as a, quote, "grave error in judgment." Now, the Epstein files appear to include calendar entries for Gates Epstein meetings, email correspondence between them about philanthropic projects, photos of Gates at events that Epstein also attended. And what we're going to do is we're going to get into some of the specific claims, the testimony in just a second, match it up. But first, here is what Bill Gates told reporters on his way into this congressional meeting.
I'm glad to be here voluntarily to testify, to help with the committee's work. I'll start with an opening statement in the hearing room. I hope my testimony is helpful to the important work of the committee to find justice for the victims.
Was it helpful? We're going to talk about it. But what we also want to do is take a look at some of the claims that have come out from the Epstein files about Gates compared to his testimony today. Now, first, there were questions arising over whether Gates, as well as many other powerful businessmen and politicians, ever visited Epstein's properties around the world. So, Gates testifying that he never went to Epstein's island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, his New Mexico ranch, or his Florida home. And according to the files, as far as we could see, there is nothing to contradict that. So any claims that he did go to those places, we're going to mark that off as fiction as of right now. Okay, then we go to this part. We go to another travel-related question. Has Gates ever flown on Epstein's private jet? And to be clear, notable people have, but that doesn't mean that they committed any crimes or knew about any illegal activity. There was one photo that was released by the Justice Department that appears to show Gates near a plane with Epstein's pilot. But Gates has acknowledged he has traveled with Jeffrey Epstein on his plane, on this private jet, so we're going to mark that one off as fact. Now, to some of the emails in the files that we've heard about, there is this one draft that was sent by Epstein to himself. It was addressed "Dear Bill," and in it, Epstein claims that Gates was having affairs, extramarital affairs, resulting in an STD, and allegedly asked for antibiotics so Gates could secretly give them to his then-wife, Melinda. Now, to be clear about this, okay, Gates denies that claim. We haven't found anything to corroborate those specific claims. So that we're going to mark off as fiction. However, Gates has acknowledged having two affairs that Epstein found out about, and today Gates said that Epstein tried unsuccessfully to use that information about his infidelity to pressure Gates to re-engage with him, so a blackmail scheme. Now, finally, according to the Justice Department files, Gates and Epstein's relationship began in 2011, so this is 3 years after Epstein's guilty plea on solicitation of a minor for prostitution, those charges in Florida. So there are questions about whether Gates may have known about all of Epstein's sex crimes. So it turns out that it seems like right now we're going to say fiction, because Gates testifying that when he was introduced to Epstein, he was aware that Epstein had faced legal issues but didn't fully understand the extent of his crimes, although he did admit knowing of Epstein's reputation. A lot more to talk about. Joining me to talk about this, I'm joined by criminal defense and civil rights attorney Josh Schiffer. He's also represented several Epstein accusers. I'm always happy to see you, sir. So what did you make of Gates' testimony? Did it change anything for you?
It was a huge day, not for the change, but validation. This is one of the most important, influential, wealthiest people of the last century. Few people have had such an outsized influence on the culture of our entire world as Bill Gates, who's really thought of as the father of so much of our digital universe. And here he is showing up and owning his truth, or at least what he's putting out as his truth in a very official way.
Did you see any contradictions? I mean, we laid it out. Did you see any contradictions?
No, I think that he's being absolutely straightforward and has some of the best handlers. If you look at the way he's handling these situations and allegations compared to so many others, this is a professionally managed program, and he was prepared to answer these questions, the answers to which are what we really all want to know.
Let's put that in context, right? He's not the first person to provide testimony, right? And he comes after a lawyer, an accountant. The assistants testified. It seems, to me, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems consistent, right? It seems like they're very consistent in the interviews, no?
Absolutely. And that is creating the very firm picture that Jeffrey Epstein had the ability and the want to manipulate people, to hold things against them, to go after what he wanted, which was power and influence, using kind of whatever means were at his hands. We're talking about allegations that Jeffrey Epstein basically extorted or blackmailed one of the most powerful people in the world. That's shocking on its face.
Here's the thing. Jeffrey Epstein is dead, okay? He's dead. The House Oversight Committee does not have a law enforcement function. They can't go out and arrest people. They can't bring charges. They can refer charges to the DOJ. What happens with this testimony? How does testimony like this from people like Bill Gates, how does that bring justice for Epstein survivors? How does that create accountability? What do they do with this testimony?
The important part is that the testimony's now been recorded, submitted, and entered into the record, even if it's going to be withheld from the general public, because this current administration, which is clearly trying to push down every mention of Epstein, they're doing everything and anything in order to keep this story out of the narrative. Those recordings will be used in the future when people in charge change. That's the important kind of road marker for right now for the victims.
Can you talk about that, right? So that's the key, right? It has to have a legislative function. I would imagine you put this into the record, we're getting a full 360-degree picture of the nightmare scenario that was Jeffrey Epstein. What kind of laws, what kind of changes could be made so there's not Jeffrey Epstein 2.0, or, and here's the scarier part, is there another Jeffrey Epstein-like figure currently here? What do they do with it? And again, go back to this question. Is there a law that can be passed? Is there reforms that can be passed? What happens?
Absolutely. And in fact, we've seen that at the state level. A number of people might remember how New York changed some of their statute of limitations laws, specifically allowing cases like those against Jeffrey Epstein to move forward. So there's always going to be a legislative remedy. It's up to the leadership that we choose as voters to bring that legislation forward and get it passed. And what I really feel is continuing to happen from the House Oversight Committee is that the evidence and the justification for these future moves in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years, to prevent this kind of victimization from ever happening again, that's when we're going to see some reform. But in the immediate battle, I don't know how much Bill Gates' testimony actually moves the issue forward, since there's so much intransigence from the administration.
Who else would you want to hear from?
Oh, there are multiple educators and business leaders, people in the fundraising community, the financial community. Remember, Jeffrey Epstein was ostensibly some form of financial advisor, giving guidance and providing guidance for vast sums to some very wealthy individuals. Many people were exposed to those transactions, can talk about what happened or didn't happen, except they're covered by NDAs, and they're all terrified. And that's before we even get back to next to my office in St. Thomas. Anybody that's ever visited the island will tell you how small it is, and there's no way this operation existed the way it did. I can tell you personally, we'd always heard rumors and things about what was going on the island. That marina is tiny. We have not heard enough from an on-the-ground investigation, and I don't think we ever will.
Let's see where it goes. Josh Schiffer, always love having you on. Thanks for taking the time, sir.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.